Early this morning, the skies over Israel lit up in a way that many military observers say they have never seen before. Air raid sirens screamed across major cities. Residents rushed into shelters. And within minutes, radar systems began tracking something extraordinary. A massive wave of ballistic missiles flying across the Middle East. What happened next shocked military analysts around the world. According to early reports from regional security sources and international media, Iran launched more than 200 missiles toward Israeli territory in one of the largest direct attacks in the history of the conflict between the two countries. Israeli air defense systems immediately activated. Interceptors shot upward, explosions flashed across the sky. But this time, something felt different. Because despite Israel's sophisticated missile defense network, several incoming projectiles appeared to slip through the shield. Stay with me, because what happened next could reshape the balance of power in the Middle East. For decades, the rivalry between Iran and Israel has been one of the most dangerous fault lines in global geopolitics. The two countries have rarely fought each other directly, but they have been locked in what analysts often call a shadow war. The conflict has played out through cyber attacks, covert operations, proxy militias, and targeted strikes across Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and beyond. Israel has long viewed Iran's growing missile program and regional influence as an existential threat. Iranian leaders, on the other hand, see Israel as a hostile power aligned with Western interests and regional rivals. The tension between these two states has simmered for years, but now the confrontation appears to be entering a far more dangerous phase. Reports began circulating shortly after midnight that multiple missile launches had been detected from Iranian territory. Satellite monitoring systems and early warning radars reportedly picked up dozens, then hundreds of launch signatures. Within moments, Israel's defense network shifted into emergency mode. The country relies on a layered missile defense architecture designed to intercept different types of threats. The most famous of these systems is the Iron Dome, which has been widely credited with protecting Israeli cities from short-range rockets fired by militant groups. But Iron Dome was never designed to stop large-scale ballistic missile attacks. For that task, Israel depends on more advanced systems like David's Sling and the Arrow missile defense program, which are specifically built to intercept long-range and high-altitude threats. And yet, as the missile barrage unfolded, reports suggested that the scale of the attack was overwhelming. Dozens of interceptor missiles were launched in response. Bright streaks cut across the sky as defensive rockets raced toward their targets. Some interceptions were successful. Massive explosions lit up the atmosphere as incoming missiles were destroyed mid-air. But analysts watching the situation closely began noticing something concerning. The sheer volume of missiles appeared designed to saturate the defense network. In military strategy, this tactic is known as a saturation attack. The goal is simple but devastating. Launch so many projectiles at once that defensive systems cannot intercept them all. And that may have been exactly what Iran was attempting. Security analysts believe that by launching more than 200 missiles in a single coordinated strike, Iran could test the limits of Israel's defensive shield. Because even the most advanced missile defense system in the world has one critical weakness: it cannot stop everything. Early damage assessments remain unclear, and information during rapidly developing conflicts can often be incomplete. However, local reports indicated that several explosions were heard in different areas, suggesting that some missiles may have reached their intended targets. Emergency crews were reportedly dispatched across multiple regions. Meanwhile, military officials worked quickly to determine whether the attack was still ongoing. But the real story begins here, because this was not just a random missile strike. Military analysts believe the scale, timing, and coordination of the launch suggests a carefully calculated message. Iran has spent years developing one of the largest ballistic missile arsenals in the Middle East. According to assessments from international defense experts, the country possesses hundreds of medium-range missiles capable of reaching targets across the region, including Israel. These missiles are central to Iran's deterrence strategy. Unlike some regional powers, Iran does not rely heavily on advanced air forces. Instead, it has invested heavily in missile technology as a way to project power and threaten adversaries at long distances. And tonight's attack may have been designed to demonstrate exactly how powerful that arsenal has become. But stay with me, because the strategic implications of this strike could be far bigger than the attack itself. The question now facing military planners across the world is simple. Was this a one-time retaliation, or the beginning of a much larger confrontation? Because if this barrage was only the opening move, the Middle East may be entering one of its most dangerous military escalations in decades. To understand why this moment is so critical, we need to look at how modern missile warfare actually works. Ballistic missiles travel at extraordinary speeds. After launch, they arc high into the upper atmosphere before descending toward their targets at several times the speed of sound. Intercepting them requires extremely precise timing, powerful radar systems, and multiple layers of defensive technology. Israel has invested billions of dollars into building exactly that kind of defensive network. Systems like the Arrow interceptors are designed to strike incoming missiles outside the atmosphere, while other layers attempt to stop anything that slips through. In theory, this layered defense creates a protective shield, but warfare rarely follows theory, because missile defense systems are not only about technology, they are also about numbers. Every interceptor missile is expensive and limited in supply. Each defensive launch must be carefully calculated, and when hundreds of incoming threats appear on radar screens at the same time, commanders are forced to make split-second decisions. Which targets are real threats, which are decoys, and which ones must be stopped at all costs? Military observers believe this is where the Iranian strategy may have been most effective. By launching a massive wave of missiles simultaneously, the attack could force Israel's defense network to expend large numbers of interceptors very quickly. Some analysts believe the strike may have included a mix of missile types: faster ballistic missiles, potentially maneuverable projectiles, and possibly drones or cruise missiles designed to complicate radar tracking. When these systems appear together on a defense grid, they create a complex battlefield in the sky. And complexity favors the attacker. International defense experts have long warned that saturation attacks represent one of the greatest challenges to modern missile defense systems. Even highly advanced networks can struggle if the number of incoming projectiles exceeds interception capacity. If that is what happened during this strike, it could explain why some missiles appeared to slip through the defensive shield. But the military implications extend far beyond Israel's air defenses. Because the real question now facing policymakers is whether this event marks a shift from covert confrontation to open conflict. For years, the tension between Iran and Israel has played out through indirect warfare. Israeli airstrikes have targeted Iranian-linked facilities in Syria. Cyber operations have reportedly struck infrastructure on both sides. Regional militias aligned with Iran have launched attacks against Israeli and Western interests. But direct missile exchanges between the two states have been extremely rare. That is what makes this moment so alarming. If Iran has demonstrated a willingness to launch large-scale ballistic strikes directly toward Israeli territory, it represents a major escalation in the strategic landscape of the Middle East, and history shows that escalation rarely stops on its own. Israel has consistently stated that it reserves the right to respond decisively to major attacks against its territory. Military planners inside the country have long prepared contingency plans for retaliatory operations that could target missile bases, military infrastructure, or command facilities. If such a response occurs, it could trigger a dangerous cycle of action and counteraction. And that cycle may not remain limited to just two countries. Across the region, multiple actors are closely watching these events unfold. Groups aligned with Iran operate in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. Israel maintains close security partnerships with the United States and other Western allies. Any further escalation could quickly draw additional players into the conflict. Energy markets are already sensitive to instability in the Middle East, a region responsible for a large share of global oil production and shipping routes. Even the perception of a widening conflict can cause sharp fluctuations in energy prices in global markets. Shipping lanes, military bases, and strategic infrastructure across the region could all become potential flashpoints if tensions continue rising. For global powers, the situation presents an extremely delicate challenge. Diplomatic channels will likely intensify as international leaders attempt to prevent the crisis from spiraling into a full-scale regional war. At the same time, military forces throughout the region may increase their readiness levels in case the conflict expands. Because once ballistic missiles begin crossing borders, the margin for miscalculation becomes dangerously small. Tonight's attack may ultimately be remembered as a demonstration of power, a signal intended to shift the strategic balance, or perhaps a warning meant to deter further confrontation, but it could also represent something far more serious: the moment when a shadow war finally stepped out into the open. For now, radar systems remain active, military commanders remain on alert, and governments around the world are watching closely. Because in a region already filled with fragile alliances and historic rivalries, even a single night of missile fire can change the trajectory of an entire conflict. And the most unsettling question still remains unanswered. Was this the peak of the crisis? Or only the beginning? Because if the past has taught us anything about the Middle East, it is this: when the skies light up with missiles, the story is rarely over. Sometimes it is only just beginning.